Hello, everyone. Good evening from India, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone joining from across Africa, Europe, and Americas. Welcome to Sankalp Dialogue, Intellecap's Global South webinar series. Our audience today comes from almost all the continents, and this geographic spread that it tells us that the question we are asking today about our responsibility for the natural resources that underpin our agriculture economies in global south, it resonates far beyond any single geography or supply chain. And my name is Shailesh Nagar, and I'm partner at Intellecap, mainly focusing on natural resource work. I'll be moderating today's session. In a moment, I'll introduce our five distinguished panelists. But before I do, I want to start with a quick poll because we want to understand who is in this room and what you are already thinking about related to this topic. So just take your time, 1.5 minutes probably, and we'll close this. And I think this we will continue in the conversation also. Another half a minute. Great. I think we can close this. Yeah, thanks. I think we have the results. I think mostly there's no shared platform to coordinate across actors, and that's basically what we are discussing in this panel today. There is also a weak business case, which is coming at number two, and ROI is not clear enough. It does not mean that there is no ROI. It's also not clear enough. And third is the corporate will and whether it is a business priority or not. So very interesting results. I think interesting pointers to take at the beginning of the session. So I think we seem to be at an inflection point in this whole thing. The natural resources, which are soil, water, forests, biodiversity, which are actually the bedrock of our agriculture economies in the global south, are degrading, and while climate variability is accelerating this stress. For example, in India, lower reservoir levels and delayed monsoon showers, especially in this El Nino year, are threatening average sugarcane yields. And also, not only the yield, but also the content, the sucrose content per hectare. In Kenya, we know that over 80% of the sugarcane is rain-fed by low productivity smallholders. And in Kenya, it is the country already is 33% water stressed. Soil is also a hidden driver of this. And in many Indian cane areas, soil organic carbon is below 0.5%, whereas the standard is around 1.5 to 2.5%, which is a healthy benchmark. Now, degraded soils lose moisture faster and need more irrigations, and that is what we know. In Kenya, also, where a lot of audience today is also coming from, only 7% of the farmers test soil and 3% use integrated weed management. So there are restoration targets in both countries, but I think what it lacks is delivery platforms as well. And this is the context in which this stewardship matters. And as we know that, UN Global Compact, CEO water mandate, it defines stewardship for private sector as reducing its own water impact, engaging suppliers and communities, working collectively with governments and stakeholders, advocating better policy and governance. It's active place-based responsibility that this mandate talks about. And at Intellecap, we have worked for over 2 decades across agriculture, natural resources, and sustainable value chains in India, Africa, and Southeast Asia, using 4 levers of knowledge, capital, networks, and technology. Our work spans food and agriculture programs, digital agriculture transformation, agribusiness feasibility studies, and blended finance for smallholder supply chains. And across this work that we have done, one lesson is very clear that project level interventions do not match the scale of the challenge that is there in natural resources. Soil degradation crosses different pilot boundaries or project boundaries, and it does not cover because few farmers drill fewer wells. It doesn't impact at the larger level. We need actually system level change, which includes the private sector as co-designer or co-investor in the places where it operates. So today's session begins that dialogue, starting with one of the India's most water intensive and policy significant systems, the sugarcane supply chain. So I'll first introduce, panelists, and then I'll start the questions for the panel members. First is Mr. Sanjay Sacheti. Mr. Sacheti is country manager of Olam Agri India Private Limited. It's part of Singapore headquartered Olam Group. Since joining Olam in 2000, he has led diversified operations across rice, grains, cotton, sugar, and other commodities, with a presence in over 10 Indian states and leading positions in rice and cotton. With 34 years of experience, he has worked with Unilever, ITC, Tata Group, and Eicher Group. He's a chartered accountant and company secretary. He has held senior industry roles with FICCI, CII, and served on Government of India expert group on agriculture exports as well. Second, we have Mr. Vivek Grewal. Vivek is a hydrogeologist and the managing partner of the technical consulting program at Well Labs. His work focuses on enabling better investments in the agriculture water sector by simplifying the science of water and promoting better use of water data. Before joining Well Labs, Vivek was part of groundwater consulting organizations in India and the US. He has also worked directly on grassroots watershed development in Jharkhand in the past. Third on the panel, we have Mr. Arun Dekshmukh. He's a leading expert in sustainable sugarcane production, micro-irrigation, and water-efficient agriculture with nearly 40 years of experience in research, technology development, extension, and industry leadership. An MTech in Water Resources Development and Management from IIT Kharagpur. He currently heads agronomy and sugarcane development projects at Netafem Irrigation India, driving precision irrigation, fertigation, mechanization, digital farming, and sustainable agronomy initiatives. Earlier, he spent over 27 years at Vasant Dada Sugar Institute, Pune, contributing pioneering work on drip irrigation, automation, and irrigation economics, and authoring extensive research and farmer-focused publications. Then we have Ms. Mika Hannah Paul. Ms. Paul is the Director for Natural Resource Management and Agroecology at GIZ India. She spearheads projects focused on rural livelihoods, climate resilience, social protection, just transition, and sustainable agriculture. Her expertise is underpinned by qualifications in economics and development practice. Lastly, we have Mr. Anuj Sharma. Mr. Sharma is a social entrepreneur and development practitioner with 20 plus years of experience designing and scaling low-cost, high-impact solutions for underserved communities across India. And engineering by training, he holds a PGDRM from IRMA and is an Amul Tata Scholar and GSBI Fellow. He led the scale-up of Piramal Sarva Jal, which provides safe drinking water to more than 7 lakh people daily across hundreds of rural and urban locations. Earlier, as part of Pratham India's national leadership team, he built and led its Rajasthan chapter. He is currently CEO of Argyam, a Bangalore-based public charitable foundation, established in 2005 through Rohini Nilekani's personal endowment, and has advanced DPI thinking, digital public infrastructure thinking, in rural drinking water and wash. Now, before I begin, I would like to offer one conceptual framework, three layers that I refer back to throughout this session. The layer one is the natural foundation, soil and water, the quality of aquifer, the organic carbon in the soil, the moisture retention capacity of the land. This is what everything else depends on. And that is what nobody has an institutional mandate to protect as a whole, as a system. The second layer is the human relationship with that natural foundation, what we call land use, which is really a set of millions of decisions, daily decisions, how a farmer irrigates, when a mill runs its operation, how a smallholder responds to a dry spell. This is where response outcomes are actually determined. And third, which is the layer of ecosystem enablers, the institutions that shape the decisions in layer two, which are financial institutions, technology providers, government agencies, development organizations, philanthropies, etc. These institutions send signals through price, subsidy data, incentives, regulation, knowledge, capital, and those signals are received by layer two actors who then make their decisions about layer one. So for the next 90 minutes, I'll ask these the things around this particular layer. I would urge the speakers to speak from experience. Name what your institution or the actor category. You are representative of the category that your institution belongs to, and which you cannot do alone, and engage probably directly with each other also. If there are long answers, then I may, respectfully have to interrupt and keep the conversations going for the audience as well. So to start with, I'll move to Mr. Sancheti from Olam. Sancheti, India basically has this, ethanol blending target, and is also has a big sugar industry. And this is dependent on consistent high volume cane supply. And any drop in this supply due to various reasons, especially from the water and soil stress, could threaten this energy security of the country and also the commodity supply for the industry as a whole. On the circularity side, we know that each ton of cane crushed produces almost 35 kilograms of press mud, which is one of the most effective soil amendments available. And in Maharashtra alone, mills crush over 100 million tons annually, and generating 3.5 million tons of this press mud. And which is most of this, as I understand, is also underutilized. Can you please tell us about what Olam's engagement is in its supply shed, especially in terms of what your team is doing, the village level entrepreneur that you are working with, the direct work with farmers on water and soil, and what signals you see this is sending to farmers about how to manage natural resources, and does this procurement signal, which is in terms of price and volume and quality expectation, align with this water and soil stewardship signal, or is there currently a gap between the two?
Uh, Thank you, Shailesh, and thanks to Intellecap for having me for this, very meaningful dialogue which we are going to have today. Just to lay out the background, we run a sugar mill come biofuel operation there in Maharashtra on the border of on its border with Karnataka, and then we deal with about 25,000 farmers. Now, sugar industry, and along with that, let's look at even the dairy industry. This is where the factory farm linkage is inseparable. It is a very, very strong linkage, and it's a very natural linkage because, especially in the case of cane, cane is not a marketable commodity as such. It is an industrial commodity which has to be where almost 70 or 80% of the commodity as grown is used in industrial form. And that's why the farmers and the factory are very strongly, they are virtually joined at the hip. Now, we work in a very challenged, hyper local area where the average landholding is less than 2 acres. And the area is also challenged in many ways waterlogging, very counterintuitively, waterlogging is a major issue there. And some areas are water stressed. But overall, the farmer is a true Indian marginal farmer. And that's where our objectives have to, if we have to meet our objectives, we have to indulge in a lot of capacity, capability building there, because the more they grow, it is better for us, because our capacity utilization is directly linked to the kind of productivity which is there in the productivity and production which is there in our hyper local area. So we work with the farmers. We have got an extension team of almost 70, 80 people who work with the farmers. We have a set of package of practices. And we realize that water and soil, two of the main ingredients for enhancing productivity, those two, there has to be a high level of awareness between us, our teams, farmers, and some of the partners with whom we work in terms of efficient utilization and the correct utilization of these resources. So we work with the farmers. We have set up soil testing labs. We provide them advisory on how to get the nutrient balance right. How do we get the soil health right? We work with them on propagating micro irrigation, and now we are just about to launch a very impactful program for drainage, water drainage, because the unique feature of that area is excessive rainfall in certain zones, and it leads to a lot of waterlogging and hence a significant drop in the productivity. So we are working with these farmers to ensure that these two resources and any other natural resources which are required are used very effectively there. And there is a high level of awareness and a high level of adoption of the prescribed practices within the farming system. Lastly, just to add, the idea is to basically get multiple actors on the stage there and ensure that farmers, for their, let's say, 16 or 18 key activities which collectively constitute the act of agriculture, how do they get supported very well for that? And we have drawn up a program which is 18 to 20 step program, which where do these multiple interventions, not on our own, but either with village level entrepreneurs or with institutions who are experts in these areas and who have specific business models for effective delivery of these goods and services to the farming system. So we are trying to bring create this coalition and ensure that it's a program which leads to mutual value creation and appropriate distribution of that value.
Thanks, Sanjay. I think interesting thing is that the corporate is already working in certain areas, and you are positive about building this kind of consortium. But I would move to, Vivek, primarily, because Well Lab sits in layer 3, and which is basically the evidence and intelligence provider. And the institution which basically makes the condition of layer 1, which is the natural resources, water and soil, visible and actionable for other actors. So even when there is a platform, and if we look at India spends over $9 billion on, let's say, farm subsidies. But many of these subsidies, as we know, it basically moves in a different direction, right? Maybe not towards conservation of the natural resources. So my question to you is that, what does the groundwater and basin data actually show in India's major, let's say, cane supply shed? If you have any research on that, especially in Maharashtra, I think you have experience in Maharashtra. Uh, Well Lab also produces groundwater intelligence, but in layer 3, a signal only matters if it changes behavior of different actors, especially in the layer 2, farmers and other players in that. In your experience, does your data really change a farmer's irrigation decision or a mill's, let's say, procurement decision? Or is it currently mainly a knowledge product which does not get utilized that much? What would need to change in terms of who accesses this data, in what form, to be more impactful?
Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks, Shailesh, for the invitation and the question. Like you said, Well Labs as a water research organization exists in what you are calling layer three. That is the enablers who help the uh, stakeholders on the ground, which you are calling layer two, which essentially are based on the natural resource system, which you are calling layer one, right? But to answer your question, I'm my experience comes from around four projects that we've had over the past couple of years in Maharashtra. And what you ask in terms of groundwater intelligence, especially in Maharashtra and the Western Maharashtra sugarcane belts, I would say there are two belts, right? One is the Krishna Basin and one is the Bhima Basin. These are two parallel strands running from Pune area to Karnataka, right? And these are, think of these like two V-shaped valleys. Okay. They're like, let's say 100-kilometer wide and 500 or more kilometer long valleys. Okay. The reason I'm saying is that to set a physical context to this discussion, it's very important to recognize that water exists in there are two very different landscapes in this area. One is an upland landscape in both these v-shaped valleys, the Bhima and the Krishna, where the upland area basically doesn't have groundwater across the year often. Of course, the shape of that upland will change. That is where you would know of these grave drinking water problems or water drains that ran, right? That is the place what hydrogeologists call the seasonal groundwater zone, right? The upland area. And then there is a central valley of Bhima and Krishna, which is the perennial groundwater zone. You will always have some water here because the upland areas are supporting it, right? So this physical distinction is very important for us to keep in mind, I think, because, and I'm glad that you have situated us to a context so that the discussion can be more meaningful. And like we know, sugarcane can only exist in high water access areas, right? It's a long crop, often year around, and we will have 4 months of rainfall. But sugarcane needs either surface water through canals or groundwater in the remaining post monsoon season, right? That is why there is a clear understanding if you zoom into satellite maps that sugarcane exists in this perennial groundwater zone that I said in the towards the valley, right? So that's the answer to your question of what does the groundwater basin data actually shows, right? So sugarcane will exist in that basin. Now, the in terms of how it can be useful to people, to the layer two, like you were saying, what happens here is that people will often have access that there's that perennial water there, but if there are years of low rainfall, which we know, like you said in the context that, this is an El Nino year, and El Nino often has these 3 to 7 year cycles. So it can have multiple years of low rainfall. And every subsequent year of low rainfall reduces our groundwater storage, right? Groundwater is the buffer against our low rainfall, right? So how quickly are the farmers reducing, the communities are reducing the buffer, right? And what happens is that in that V-shaped valley, the people on the fringe lose the water first, right? And that is where the industry, the agro industry, will also feel the pinch, right? So that is the corner space where actually the problem of scarcity will exist. In the middle of the valley, like Sanjay ji said, very contrastingly, it is the problem of water logging because it's black clay soil. So in monsoons, you will see the number one problem of the farmer in Maharashtra is waterlogging cheaper. So the water doesn't go away once it rains well. 10 days, your root can start rotting, right? So they have to in monsoon they have to get the water out, and especially in the central areas, and then in the fringe areas the situation is very different, right? To cut the long story short, that physical context has to be understood. And my last point is that, like you were saying, the this data should be useful for the people, right? They should cause a change in how the things are managed. And in my experience, micro irrigation, for example, in the peripheral area people will have great adoption of that because they feel the pinch. Whenever the alignment of farmer interest with water scarcity occurs, micro irrigation, I'm sure Arunji can add, will be the first good thing that the farmer will invest and get themselves, right? But in a place where there is no scarcity, very close to the main basin, people it doesn't align that well for them to invest and take that because they don't feel that pinch. But the basin exists together. The water that the valley uses is actually recharged from the upland, right? So that is where, like you have situated, the basin approach has to come in because the recharge happens upstream. If you want your days to day zero, like they say, to increase from 2 years to 5 years, then you have to have those structures in the upstream area and increase the micro irrigation and other water use efficiency in the main central area, right? So those are the dynamics, and we have to align with the people's requirement to make sure that these technicalities are taken up, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Vik. I think the interesting part is that what you are saying is that as we increase the scale of, let's say, looking at the scenario or let's say supply shed for an industry, I think it will lead to differentiated interventions, and that can be underpinned by the data, and that will be very important. You also talked about micro irrigation, so I'll move to Mr. Deshmukh. So Netafim, as I see, is they sit at layer 3 as the technology signal. Your product directly mediates how farmer in layer 2 relate to water in layer 1. The session basically is looking at the question that I'll ask is that can you give us some headline numbers in a sugarcane context in terms of water savings, yield improvement, and ROI timeline for farmers? And what I know from our other works in different states and even in Maharashtra, and that's the harder question, that if the ROI is high from drip irrigation and the subsidy in many Indian states also, we know that it's pretty high. Why is the adoption still low among smallholder cane farmers? And what is the actual barrier? Is it subsidy excess? Is it awareness, risk perception, or something more structural in nature?
Yeah. Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you, everybody, for joining this platform. And your question is basically, you see, the drip irrigation has been amply proved by the data, by the agriculture universities or the research stations, obviously industry demos also. And drip irrigation now not new for the farmers. As far as number is concerned, actually, I can tell you water saving, yes. Actually, the crop water requirement under drip irrigation or any type of irrigation system never changes. Only thing is that how efficiently you are applying the water to the root zone of the crop and throughout the ontogeny of the crop. So drip irrigation is the technology by which you'll be applying required quantity of water, what we call it as a peak crop water requirement, and that is nothing but the evapotranspiration. Okay. So actually water saving, what we occur as compared to furrow irrigation or conventional irrigation or surface irrigation, we can say, it is in the range of 40 to 50%. Yield increase, yes. Yield increase is because of what? Maintaining the soil moisture nutrient relationship throughout the crop growth period, that gives the increased productivity. And that productivity increase is from the range of 25 to 40%. That differs actually. That again differs upon the baseline, the other practices, certainly agronomic practices, the fertigation technologies which are being adopted with the farmers. As far as the ROI is concerned, I will tell it to you. Actually, for the sugarcane, you see, the incremental yield I told you to you, that is minimum 30% if you consider on a conservative side. Then also, if average yield of a farmer is of 40 tons, actually at all India level, it is about 32 to 33 tons per acre. But if you consider 40 tons per acre or 100 tons per hectare, then also if you consider 30% increase, that means 30% into 40. So that will be 12 tons. And so the drip irrigation, as far as the government is concerned, actually they have fixed the 7 years life of the drip irrigation system, which is ISR now. Okay. If the standard irrigation system have the life of 7 years, I consider on a conservative side 5 crop seasons, or as far as sugarcane is concerned. So the cost actually, if you consider the subsidy, leave it aside. The cost actually, when we have the crop geometry at a distance of 1.5 meter, the row spacing, so that comes to around 50 to 55,000 rupees per acre. Suppose it is 55,000 and 5 crop seasons, I can say 11,000 per crop season. Okay. So 11,000 is the cost actually that has to be incurred by the farmer on the drip irrigation system. And if he gets 12 tons extra, so 12 into minimum 3,000 rupees, that is also I am taking on a conservative side. So it comes to 12 into 3,000 rupees, it is 36,000 rupees. So 36,000 for 5 crop seasons, it will be 1,80,000. So if you spend 11,000, then you'll get 36,000. Okay. So this is how the ROI is a very, what I can say, attractive ROI. But till then, regarding the adoption, you were asking me about the barriers. Basically, what has happened as far as Maharashtra is concerned, I belong to Maharashtra, and Maharashtra drip irrigation in sugarcane has always taken a lead actually in Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, about, means as per the data goes, actually because the subsidy in the Maharashtra started from the year 1996. And actually, we were working in the Vasantmata sugar industry also. And we promoted this technology in the operational area of the many of the sugar mills in Maharashtra, in a cooperative sector as well as in a private sector. Actually, what happened now? The farmers, yes, they know the benefit of the drip irrigation system. But the most important barrier, I think, is that they have to pay upfront. Or we can say the financial liquidity. Actually, if we see the farmer, if he has to pay 55,000 rupees upfront, then it's difficult for him. In this case, the other stakeholders, maybe sugar mill, the government is government is giving the subsidy. But the subsidy, when it is available, subsidy is available after installation of the system, then means checking by the government authorities. And many of the times what happens, subsidy is not regular. Means this year's subsidy will go in the next year, and that becomes a problem. So that is a major barrier, what I feel. Upfront investment. That is one. Second is that, you see, actually for the drip irrigation, water is a prerequisite. Availability of the water is a prerequisite. Actually, that water should be available. And as Mr. Vivek has said, actually, the water availability up to monsoon, especially in the summer season. And summer season is always a peak growth period. When the water requirement of crop increases, that time water is not available in the, especially groundwater. And water available in the canals and drip irrigation schemes also, the irrigation interval is being increased. And because of that, there is a problem with the drip irrigation system also. And then the other problems are subsidy, you see. I told it to you, subsidy is not available regular. Although it is 75 to 80%, if it is a regular subsidy, no, then there will not be a problem. In many of the other states which I observed, especially in UP and other states also, because UP is the state actually having the maximum area under sugarcane. Okay. So in UP, I have found that actually there are the government schemes like a GGRC in Gujarat, then Tanoda in Tamil Nadu, like UPMIP in now it has been started in UP. So UP, they are getting the subsidy. Subsidy actually that goes to the company only. So that companies are coming forward and giving the drip irrigation system to the farmer. But the main problem is that the farmers share, which comes to 15 to 20%, that has to be borne by the farmers. And the farmers are not ready because they are not water. Actually, they are not concerned about the water. They're concerned about the yield improvement. Actually, water is available. Till then, they have to use the drip irrigation system. And there is a misconception in the farming community that if the water is less, then only they should go for the drip irrigation system. But yeah, I wanted to stress upon drip irrigation is the productivity improvement program. It is for increasing the productivity and also the quality of products. That's a very important. Actually, that needs to be enforced actually. And in this case, what I feel, the farmer share in the states like UP, which is 15 to 20%, of the farmers are giving the cane to the sugar mills. In this case, actually, the sugar mills should come ahead and they should bear the farmer share initially. And then this system can go ahead. So what I feel, and after sales service, the company is actually, you say, the Net of drip irrigation or any other drip irrigation company, they're always there. We say, no, we are very proactive. Basically, if the sugar factory is coming to us, government is supporting the drip irrigation system and this program, the company is actually, our bread and butter depends upon that. So we are not giving only the product, but we are working in a project approach. We give them the guidance regarding the agronomy guidance we are giving, after sales service we are providing. So the survey, design, installation, after sales service, if there is any problem, well, there are a lot. We can say the intensive dealers network. through which we are providing them the things. But you see, yes, the area is being increased. In Maharashtra, as per the data I wanted to tell you, the cumulative, the subsidy taken data for the sugarcane is about 4 lakh hectares out of 14 lakh hectares. And actually, this area is increasing every year. I think if it continues, subsidies available, and the farmers knows the importance. Minimum 1 to 1.5 lakh hectare area in one state, that is Maharashtra, will be got under drip irrigation in sugarcane. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Arunji. I think these barriers we also, felt when we were doing work in UP. And one of the things was that, like you said, that UP MIP actually led to better distribution of the subsidy. But I think still the problem was, and we were trying to work on that, was this financial liquidity for farmers. Even smaller amounts for farmers, it's difficult. So how do we create a kind of capital framework, which basically is farmers are able to take the money from there and basically get the micro irrigation system installed. And as you said that the productivity gains, it's not only the water saving, but also the productivity gains are also there from the drip irrigation. Thanks.
Actually, I wanted to add in this, basically, you see, with some of the sugar factories, we have worked with the Mawana group, especially Naglamar Sugar Complex. Actually, what they did, whatever the farmer said was coming, they were giving upfront, and they were actually deducting from the cane payment. But what happens as per the government policy, whether the sugar mill is authorized to
yes,
deduct it from the cane payment. So that is an issue. Otherwise, actually, that can run very smoothly if the sugar mills come forward and the government gives them the permission to deduct it from their cane payment in 1 or 2 installments. Because it's a bigger amount. Actually, it's about 20,000 rupees for 15 to 20,000 rupees per hectare item.
Yeah. So I think for everyone, especially from for audience from Africa, that within India, different states have different policy context when it comes to sugar industry, especially in terms of the procurement thing. And UP has a different framework. Maharashtra has a different framework. So those kind of policies also affect the credit availability to farmers and many other things, I would say. So yeah, so I would like to move to Mika now. Mika, what I think is GIZ sits in the layer 3 in the framework that I described earlier as an institutional capacity builder and convergence facilitator. You design systems, build capacities, and co-finance programs that shape how these layer 2 actors, which is farmers, their institutions, and others, relate to the layer 1, which is natural resources. And I know that Pro Soil programs, Huawei program is doing a lot in India. But layer 3 also includes powerful state signals, right? That currently send farmers probably in a different direction. So my question is that India has significant public capital flows into water and soil in its, if you look at cane geographies also, they are not different. I think these public flows are also there in terms of PM Pranam, NMSA, Atal Bhujal Yojana, micro irrigation subsidies, etc. There are also corporate stewardship programs which exist or are possible in the same supply sheds. Like Sanjay ji actually said that they are already working in these areas and willing to take that central position in this. However, these flows, the public flows, or both these flows rarely converge within a shared planning architecture. From your experience, from GIZ's experience at the government-private interface, what's the kind of structural gap that you think prevents this kind of convergence? And what would you see from a corporate anchor to co-design this kind of a integrated program around a shared supply shed level for the natural resource conservation?
Thank you, Shailesh. First of all, thanks to Intellecap Avishkar Group for this invitation. Sankalp Dialogues have kicked off, so I think this is a fantastic gathering. Maybe just to put it in context, what we do as GIZ, a lot of you are aware, we work on behalf of the German government and in many countries across the globe and also in India since the last 7 decades. And one of our mega portfolios has been environment, the whole green cluster, natural resource management, climate change, and so forth. And like Shailesh rightly said, at the heart of what we do is this question that we were answering in the beginning, to see ourselves as an ecosystem enabler, because most of our funding in agriculture currently, we have a 60 million euro portfolio going on. Most of our funding comes in bilateral projects to strengthen the Indian government's various programs. You mentioned NMSA, the National Mission on Natural Farming, agroecology, sustainable natural resource management, water, soil. These are our major portfolios. And if we look at, in very simple terms, this whole issue of convergence, I think that's been like a buzzword since many years now. This has been at the heart of what we do. And we are talking about the agriculture sector, right, which is, let's say, 16 to 80% of India's GDP, and that's roughly around 600 billion USD that we are talking about. So clearly, I think there is no dearth of financing or investments on this topic. So it is not a financing gap. And I think what we are somehow seeing is a coordination gap and a governance gap. Having said that, as a challenge, I think we are really moving towards a very promising situation, and a lot of hopeful examples have also emerged in the recent past. Our experience of convergence has been to see that it's a classical silo problem that all of us have. We usually like our silos, be it in any organization, be it within the government, and be it within the ground. So we all want to see convergence in the outside sphere, but if we look at the inside sphere, I think it's the same. Especially if we look at government programs, they are always designed around institutional mandates. And usually that mandate does not look at a landscape approach like many of us are talking today. They are always designed by a particular ministry or a department, or let's say a CSR program or a finance institution. And each of them have their own objectives, their own reporting systems. And hence, the whole approach of natural resource management doesn't, let's say, come automatically. So we are coming to the point of a lack of shared planning architecture as a key problem here. However, I think if we put together, and I remember we did this work to look at water as a resource around 2019 or 2020. We looked at all the national programs and we figured out there's actually lakhs of crores of rupees available. It is about how do we blend this together? And before we talk about public, private, even within the public, even within the same ministry, we somehow don't see two programs being blended together. From our experience, maybe a few examples are, for us, it has always worked when we put it together at a district level. Because somehow we see when it is a district, we have one district collector or one district coordinator who kind of has the convening power to bring everybody together, be it all his or her line departments, be it the CSR funding available. Then you go to the states where you have district mineral funds, then they are head of it. They're somehow also the head of, let's say, disaster management and these kind of topics. So overarching mandates of climate resilience and things also come under him or her. I feel like above them and below them, everything is again silo. So wherever we have been able to work with the district and convince them that a landscape approach makes a lot of sense for sustainable natural resource management, makes sense for sustainable market development, we have quite succeeded in trying to bring the programs together. The point that Arunji also raised is, I think, very relevant. The whole point of subsidies, how are they kind of distributed? The question is also, when are they distributed and who gets it? For example, we work a lot with the Public Works Program of the Indian government, erstwhile in the NG form and now in the VBG Ramji form, has huge amount of resources available for water and soil conservation measures. Ideally, we need it pre-monsoon so that your structures are in place. That is what is the intent of the government also, but somehow it might not devolve exactly like that. What kind of systems can we put in place? Again, the planning process is supposed to be handled by a Gram Sabha and a Gram Panchayat. But we cannot solve landscape-based problems looking at only a social mapping or a transact work at a Gram Panchayat Sarpanch level. This is where now I think all our digital solutions that go in the layer of GIS, remote sensing. In India, we have such good open source data available from the National Remote Sensing Center. We are able to now look at a river basin beyond a watershed, actually see the ridge and valley, and really able to do planning at a landscape level, which can then be kind of divided into the funding practices we have from the government. Once we have that, we have also had very successful cases where we are able to layer CSR on top of it. And that kind of a planning can actually happen at a district level. Because otherwise, all of us are making water harvesting resources and then you're duplicating the funds. So, how do we handle the question of delays, the right timing versus bridging financing sources, bringing in blended topics. I think this has been a constant source of area that we work. And what we've been able to do quite successfully now, and Intellecap has been a huge part of many of these initiatives, is to also bring these coalitions in place. So, two coalitions that we kind of have since a couple of years now, or we are part of in a huge way, is one is the Coalition on Agroecological Transformation that has many partners from the private philanthropy fields and also organizations like GIZ, and another one on Coalition for Food Systems Transformation, where again we have a variety of startups, private sector, CSRs, philanthropies coming together. Now we also have our development banks like NABARD becoming interested in such coalitions, really trying to now look at public, private, blended finance models becoming a reality. So I think that is where we are headed. And what I also see interesting is now from a supply side approach, we have a lot of interest from the private sector that is going towards regenerative agriculture. And again, when we say regenerative agriculture, there is soil and water at the heart of it. And this is where we are trying to layer landscape on top of regenerative agriculture. And I think this is a great pathway. While the private sector is on this, at the same time, we see the Indian government also. Recently, we had the BRICS working group on agriculture. And if you look at the minutes of the meeting, you actually see India now talking about natural farming and regenerative agriculture. We are looking at a center of excellence on this topic to come up from an IIT. So I feel like we are all now acknowledging each other's roles and each other's presence and how do we go about it. One last point, maybe in this regard, is the whole role of community institutions in this whole blending purposes. When we look at subsidies, if you actually go to the ground, one reason why subsidies are not reaching the right audience at the right time is also because you probably have one block level officer for agriculture who is supposed to reach out to thousands of farmers and actually make this happen. So there's no dearth of schemes or finances, but somehow, if you look at the implementation mechanism, we will have gaps. Yeah. But again, this whole level of community cadres that we have built across different programs, we had that whole spree, which is still continuing. So we have from Pashu Sakis to Krishi Sakis to drone babies to whatnot. Now, I think we even have weather didis now. How do these coordinate with each other? How do they kind of play a role bridging local level planning to digital planning processes to the district administration? How can we incentivize this? And I think that is where, again, looking at it from a point of stewardship, we can bring in great examples to make this work. Again, just like there is no dearth of finances, I think we have no dearth of people. Yeah. And we are in a mode of skilling them, orienting them, introducing truckloads of digital applications, bringing in AI. We've break barriers in terms of financial literacy, digital literacy. We are into interactive voice response mechanisms. So people don't even, the reading and writing gap is gone because now you can do audio based things, right? So I think India is constantly moving forward. How do we also kind of make them a part of this whole shared planning architecture that we are talking about? So how do we have public, private, but all these in betweens, and they kind of weld and bridge it in a sustainable fashion? Because ultimately we will need localized solutions. Just like the cane problem that we are talking, any supply shed or any geography will have its own challenges and will need its own community leaders who kind of continue this sustainably. That should be at the heart of it. Back to you, Shailesh.
Yeah, thanks, Mika. I think one of the very which is kept in opposite is corporate stewardship, community stewardship. So what you are also saying and what I get from that is that community, which is basically living there, working there, they depend on natural resources and or the mediator, the layer two, and where also company sits, their investments are also in that particular area. Communities are working in this. And then there is this intermediary layer, which is basically entrepreneurs and which are part of this. And initially you talked about the government's program on regenerative agriculture and agroecology as well, and that's where I think that layer has to play that role, and those entrepreneurs are going to be the key. So how do we basically strengthen them with capacities, with financing, with kind of guidance, where this whole thing towards sustainability and sustainable use of natural resources which is helping everyone in that supply shed. So that can become a possibility. So I think that is also something that I take from what you are saying. Thanks, Mika. And I'll move to Anuj ji. Anuj ji, Argyam, I see that it sits in the layer 3 as the catalytic philanthropic voice, the institution that basically funds what other layer 3 actors structurally maybe not. And governance, which includes governance design, evidence generation, community participation infrastructure. Uh, so my question to you is that as Argham has, almost 2.5 decades of experience funding water governance in India, what does that experience suggest are the reasons, multi-actor platforms need to be successful? And do you think that corporate anchored platform design addresses some of the issues which were there earlier?
Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you, Intellecap, for inviting a water perspective on this conversation. Mika has covered quite a bit of it, and even what others said, I have a lot of things that I agree with. But trying to stay more focused on your question. So while we have a lot of new technology-led capabilities today, I think and I'm using a very specific term, the data which exists is not trusted. Right? So the trusted data layer versus just having data, I think that's different. And when I say trust and convening, I don't mean it's a convening of, let's say, development finance institutions and large NGOs and philanthropies and the scientific expertise and of the private sector industry players who are engaging with a particular subset in a geography. Where is the convening of the second layer? I think that's a big question. See, in dairy, if you look at it in the three-tier structure of dairy cooperatives in the country, I think the second and third layer have been successful and effective largely because at the first level itself, there's a lot of this collective identity. So to me, the trusted data is one part of it. And the other thing is to begin with the second layer collectivization is one thing that I'm not sure how well it functions in agriculture. In my opinion, we have a lot of structures named under different schemes. I don't think those structures are, because in daily, almost on daily basis, you are interacting with each other, right? You're going to pour milk and, there is this whole dynamics of the fat percentage knowing the amount that you are getting, etc. So that's one, the trusted data part of it. And the second part I would call the institution, the convening not at a state or national level, the convening even at sub-district and let's say, for want of any better word, because we are talking about sugar and there was earlier reference to the industrial commodity and industrial use. So like you have watershed, let's call it feedstock shed, right? And so where is the convening at that level? And do we have a strong enough institution there? This is one thing that I would say we can definitely learn from participatory groundwater management part of it. Because otherwise what is invisible could be easily taken to be infinite. I'm talking about the groundwater, right? I mean, everybody starts pumping it out. The third part is also to me, what we learn from this work is the incentive side of it, right? While, say in sugar industry, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, especially Mr. Sacheti, who's in the industry, while there is sugar cooperatives, whether it is private owner or sugar cooperative, or whether it's an association of the two, largely they represent one interest group. Imagine a non-cane farmer from the same aquifer, right? So what we call it is the counter capacity, right? So there is a counter view in the room, and that needs to be heard, and their ability to verbalize their concerns have to be brought to the table. Otherwise, the convening remains around the industry interest, not around the shared natural resource, which is the first layer on which we want the governance to strengthen. Right? So I hope I'm able to delineate seeing how this kind of moves. I would also talk about the price signal. See, the industry does not decide the price signal. I hope everyone will agree with me, right? I mean, price signals are decided nationally. And whether it is the newly introduced ethanol dynamics or whether it is any other subsidy dynamics or anything, right? Let's say you have a target, saying so many liters you have to make available, etc. Now, those signals, in my opinion, are incomplete. Whether it is a target to doubling commodities production, I mean, per acre productivity and all of that, whether it is target of reaching a certain level in a commodity production, right? Saying as country we should do that. These are only price signals, and to be fair to private sector, they very efficiently react to the price signal, right? And so what it does is, if the price signal is incomplete, let's say in this case, in sugarcane's case, the water not being captured in the price signal, so to speak, right? In that watershed, what the situation is and how for a non-cane producer, what could be, let's call it compensatory arrangement for the sake of building a term here, right? So the price signals have to be very clear. The one thing on the private sector, and thank you, Shailesh, because you pushing to come to this conversation. I had to do some homework, and what I realized, and I would like to hear with everyone else, is say we have the case of compressed biogas plants. I understood saying there were about 1,000 plus LOIs, and hardly, I think, 10% or 15% plants actually exist against that number of LOIs, right? Then the question is, so the capital can come to the incentives and to the price signals, right? There's also this whole, and this is why I went to the institutions and the cooperatives first, this whole idea of collecting the waste in the fields and sort of aggregating enough and bringing it to the plant. And so the economics of it, dynamics of it has to be sort of parallelly thought through, regardless of what crop, what catchment, what geography we're talking about, right? I mean, so other than that, I think the convening, yes, it is needed. From our own experience, I would also say the data, like I think earlier, what Well Lab's response was saying the intelligence is fine, but the behavior change, you have to take it to the people. But so there is a factual object that has to be done, which is the data side of it. There's a role of synthesizer and amplifier, and it can't be asymmetric, right? It can't be only industry side of it. And hence, as a panelist, I would like to share a concern, saying unless we address this design issue, the private sector stewardship becomes a question mark, right? Because deciding definitions and metrics are super important, right? And then this can lead to the downstream design and incentives and all of that, right? So I think for this question, and especially coming from Argham's experience, I'll take a pause here. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anuj. I think some important points, especially in terms of inclusivity in the design, not leaving the farmers, especially from the layer one perspective, and the data rigor which is required. And I think some of the examples that you were also citing about the compressed biogas, there is a lot of investment which is already being made, and I think there are different kinds of these enterprises currently, but that's a different matter. I think we can take it in a separate kind of conversation around it. But I'll move to, I think Vivek again, because you were talking about data rigor. Vivek, what usually you talked about the doing a kind of assessment or data layer or intelligence layer in a supply shed or in a kind of geography, especially from the perspective of providing information to this kind of coalition, and on which the decisions can be based. And these decisions will be on sustainability as well as on farmers, yield and all that. So what do you think usually is the cost to build this kind of basin intelligence, which can actually drive the convergence this platform is actually trying to achieve? Second is that what are the benefits that such intelligence can bring to the table to the stakeholders in this multi-actor platform? Because, and again going back to what Anuj was saying, that we are not only looking at the supply shed players, but this information I think will also be relevant for all the farmers and probably other stakeholders in the area, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Saresh. And before I come to the benefits and cost of a data intelligence platform, just wanted to chime into what Anuj was saying. If we want a basin collaborative to become a reality, it has to be inclusive, like you also responded. And the way it is, there are some people who contribute more and some people who get less. That's just the nature of the physical reality in water sometimes. And if these things are not understood and sorted transparently, the any collaborative will not be sustainable, right? Anuj was also saying any larger collaboration or cooperatives will have to stay on this basic layer of inclusivity. And I think, uh, of course, we want the system to be resilient, that okay, if there are bad monsoons or other sort type of shocks, it should be resilient. Sustainability is one side and equity is also other side, right? So we need to keep those in balance. Now, coming to your question on the benefits of data intelligence, I would say there are three categories the way we generally see it. Using data, basically, you fit it in three different places in a larger project, right? First is a diagnostic phase, understanding, okay, if this is your symptom, let's say waterlogging or drying of wells or any other, let's say, water quality getting bad, what is the root cause of that area, right? You can't treat all fever in the same way by giving a paracetamol, right? So the shade of the problem will be different in such a large area. The second category is solution. Third is impact assessment. All of us would call it differently, but that's one way. On diagnosis, essentially, data can help you assess the geographical variation often of these different outcomes, right? So if, let's say, the what are the areas that are reducing in their agricultural output, right? What is the sensitivity of these different areas? If a monsoon is this bad, which areas go how bad in terms of low productivity? Like a participant from Africa was saying that the productivity of agriculture of sugarcane is low in their rain-fed areas. And then also we should keep in mind the quality side of it, right? Because there is so much fertilizer and other chemicals used in this in intensive agriculture, the way we do it, and micro irrigation in a way minimizes it. By fertigation, you give you minimize the lost sort of nutrients and you increase the efficiency of nutrient uptake, right? What is the variability of these excess chemicals that aggregate year over year, right? Because in we have seen in places after places that intensive agriculture, if continued for decades, can lead to collapse because of over accumulation of chemicals, right? uh, Basically, the salinity of water increases because of over application. I mean, the the Mesopotamian civilization collapsed because of over irrigation. In a sense, like the because of salinity increase because of the way it happened. So one has to keep these ideas in mind, and so the data can help pick up those signals on what are the different outcomes that are going bad, right? So that's the diagnosis side. Then of course there are in the solutioning. Once you have enough understanding of what works well where, you can optimize for demand side solutions can. Oh, sorry, did I lose you guys?
Yeah, just for 5-10 seconds.
Oh, okay. No, so I was saying that it's important to understand the return on investment, right? From a simplistic water perspective, we have found that demand side solutions like micro irrigation can have much more, impact on meter cube saved compared to a check dam. Especially because the regions in Maharashtra are already saturated with structures. So those understanding of which solution works best, the cost benefit of that also can be gathered through data over time, right? And then of course there is the impact assessment. But impact assessment, if to be useful for the people, has to be learnings focused, not for the sake of just finding which car won. We need to know why is which car winning, right? To do it better in the future, or continue to do it better, because these systems are here for the long run, right? So to understand, so those are some of the ways in which data intelligence can help. I'll just end with one example. The way it's done in California. I used to do some groundwater consulting work in California long back, where basically they have these digital twins of how water exists in the landscape. And then you apply different scenarios that, okay, if this pressure changes, this land use changes for this, then what is the area of impact, right? So that, for example, if and like a scenario on, okay, if it's 3 years of bad monsoon, what will be the scenario, and what change in our behavior can mitigate it, right? So they are much ahead in terms of modeling. We need to at least get data so that 10 years down the line we can make those models, and which will actually give you much better intelligence. But of course, like Anuj said, we are still in the phase of understanding whether the data is good or not.
Yeah. Thanks, Vivek. And I think the key thing is that whatever data layer or intelligence framework that is built at the basin level or in the supply shed, I think the usefulness in terms of farmers' decisions, not only farmers' decisions, but also the investments which go in. And I think this can not only inform farmers' decision, but also the public investments as well as private investments in the area, and from both demand as well as supply perspective, and interventions what can be done in that particular area. Thanks. So I'll basically, next question is to Mr. Deshmukh. And Arunji, you mentioned that there is a need for a tripartite model, which is basically between the technology partner like yourself, sugar mill, and the financial institution. If let's say the corporate commits to a procurement preference for, let's say, drip irrigated cane, a price premium or volume preference, it has happened in certain areas, I think. Does that change the farmers' economics enough to unlock adoption of micro irrigation at scale? And what's the kind of minimum that the corporate should commit for this technology platform to work? And what does the multi-actor platform need to provide that no single corporate actor can?
Yeah, this is a very critical. Basically, I was telling you about the financing is a very, very important. Actually, the sugar mill now was the main problem in the sugar industry now. Is the crushing capacity has been increased. Okay, installed crushing capacity is now very. If you see in Maharashtra also, the installed crushing capacity is about 10 lakh. Okay, and actually the cane required for them will be about 2,000 lakh of tons. The available cane is about 1,000 lakh tons. So actually, you see, to use the available capacity, the biggest problem in front of the sugar mills is that whether they will be able to crush the cane for 150 or 160 days. In year 2024-25, I will tell you the crushing days were only 83 in Maharashtra. With so much of installed capacity, we have made the OS. So now the case is that we cannot increase the area under sugarcane. We have limitations. So now there is the only vertical growth is required, and the yield improvement is the drip irrigation is the only technology by which you can increase the land use efficiency, input use efficiency, that is fertilizer use efficiency. You can reduce the labors, you can reduce the fertilizer requirement, and you can increase the yield minimum by 30%. So actually the sugar mills has to take the lead. They should be very proactive, and there is a need to have the tripartite agreement between the financial organization, the sugar mills, and the technology providers or the industry. Okay. And actually the farmer, actually they should select the farmer. Mill should select the farmer, those who are supplying the cane to them on a regular basis. That is their data. And based on that, actually, you see, I will tell you the example in 2012 or 13, it was decided by the government of Maharashtra that entire sugarcane should come under drip irrigation. And that time what happens, actually the net of irrigation itself has about agreements with the sugar mills, about 60 sugar mills. But now the case is that it has come to number 8 to 9. Why it has happened? The thing is that actually the sugarcane availability in nearby areas is a big problem for the sugar mills. That's why the sugarcane is diverted to another mills. They're taking the advantage from one mill and they're supplying the cane to other mill. Recovery of the payment is a big problem. That's why the sugar mills are actually they're worried about giving the corporate guarantee. Unless and otherwise there is the corporate guarantee, because this is the strongest thing what they can do. But they have to have the assurance from the cane growers to supply the cane to them only. That entirely depends upon the organic relations between the farming community and that sugar mill. That is one thing. The second, actually, they can give the premium, that 50 rupees per ton of cane, which comes from the drip irrigated plots. But actually, that is not working that much. It's we can say it is a medium. But giving 1 to 3% higher rate, that will not work. But the thing is that the corporate guarantee giving and arranging the finance to the farmers is a very, very important. Then only it is going to happen. For our case, I can tell it to you, we are giving the credit to some of the sugar mills who are giving us the payment after harvesting of the cane of that farmers. So we are giving them the credit of 12 to 15 months. Only we are charging them the interest because the companies cannot supply. Yes, but we are there to give the credit. Only thing is that the sugar mills have to have the organic relationship with the farmers and get the canes from them and deduct the recovery or payment actually from their cane payment. And that is the only thing which will work in future if we have to increase the area under drip irrigation in sugar. And I guarantee it to you, drip irrigation is the only solution now. It's in a totality if we see, because the soil fertility and productivity can be maintained through drip irrigation, the yield can be increased, and the sugar mills can get the cane to their crushing capacity so as to have the sustainability on a larger percent. That is why I tell drip irrigation. I can write on the blank paper actually. So the drip irrigation increase the productivity minimum by 30%. And in the same area, if the 30% of the sugarcane production increases, then that is enough for that sugar factory. Yes. So this is how actually they should be. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Arunji. I'll move to Sanjay ji. I think we also want to keep some time for question and answers. And I would want to, I have two questions for every panelist. So I want to cover that as well. Sanjay ji, for Olam to anchor a multi-actor platform, or provide a kind of stable center in the supply shed where you are working, around which technology, finance, data, governance align. What does that practically mean to you? And what does Olam bring to the table? And what does it need from the other actors present in that coalition, to hold together?
So it's very simple. We are the conduit. The final value which is generated by the landscape there, let's say the cane landscape. Let's not talk about the larger landscape, but the cane landscape, the sum total of that value actually passes through us. And how do we ensure that it flows back to everybody in the right ratio, in such a manner that their interest is taken care of, and the convergence, that glue which will hold all the actors together towards a common goal, which is about farm productivity. And farm productivity might have multiple factors driving it. That glue is what is provided by private sector anchors, off-takers like us. Only thing is that the environment in the cane industry is most facilitative for this kind of an arrangement. Because as I said earlier, the farmer and the factory is joined at the hip. They can't be separated. We need them, they need us, and we can't go elsewhere, they can't go elsewhere. So that's such a beautiful arrangement. It's very facilitative. And then on top of it, what I just earlier said, the value is there with us. And we know how to bring that value back to the actors in the right ratio. Because that's what, so what Arun Deshmukh talked about, that we have to secure their payment. It's there for each and every actor in a multi-stakeholder relationship. Everybody's value can be protected by a private sector anchor. And then, not to forget, the public-private convergence. So how do we work with the government to ensure that their schemes converge? Because probably are in a position to provide that assurance that, look, that productivity, we will bring the actors together, we will make them converge towards the same set of goals. We will see that the value flows forward and then backward, right? And people's interest is taken care of, and it's a sustainable arrangement. Now, have we been able to do it till now? No, we have not been able to do it, but I can clearly see that this is possible. And I've seen that some people have been ahead of us. So we have seen this happen in the case of some large corporates in value chains where they've been able to orient the complete value chain towards the common goal, which is market oriented goal. So it could be, let's say, a value chain which is completely focused on differentiated produce. Now, differentiated produce, it could be, let's say, chili, or it could be any kind of spices which are focused towards the European market. And European market has some very stringent MRL standards and all the IPM related challenges which are there. If you are able to orient that complete value chain towards that goal, and I'm just diverging a little bit from the cane industry, you are able to do that, because then the farmers get differentially, remunerated for producing that differentiated quality. And once they are motivated to do that, then you also bring in all the actors who will support them in doing that as productively as possible. But you have to stitch it together very well. The designing of the program, keeping in mind the convergence of all the actors, is the key. And which I've seen some examples which are there either here or we have done it in Africa in a few cases.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, because I think couple of examples we also have where, shifting from, let's say, a puddle transplanted rice to DSR. And I think private sector's role in that was quite critical. And I think there are some initiatives which are also currently going on rice and other commodities as well. So I see a possibility. And of course, means I think the feedback or the inputs, I think, which we are getting from this panel is also pointed in that direction. That some of the things that we need to cover, I think they are clearly coming from this panel. Thanks, Sanjay ji. I'll move to Mika now. Mika, the most powerful, layer 3 signal in India, cane belt or any other supply shed is from state. And as we have seen, but there are kind of conflicting signals. So there are some policies which are not aligned with the kind of natural resource conservation or its sustainable use. So do you think that is a place-based multi-actor platform viable if those state signals remain unchanged? Or does the state have to be at the table as a co-designer in this? And what one condition I would say ask you that from government would most accelerate this kind of convergence this platform is trying to achieve?
Thanks, Shailesh. I think the simple answer is yes, yeah, to both the questions. For a place-based multi-actor platform, if we are looking at state signals being changed, I think that's like a long-term goal. What can we do within the current system? Because any kind of a policy change will require innovations, will require evidence, will require time. But nothing stops us from starting now. And that can only happen if the interests of all the shared stakeholders are kind of taken care of. It is very linked to what Sanjay was just talking about. So if we are talking about any kind of a supply chain perspective, What are the farmers benefiting out of this? Specifically talking here in this case, what are the sugar mills getting? What are the companies getting? What do intermediaries like all of us who bring in data, coordination, technical knowledge, capacity building, all of us benefit? I think this needs to be clear, right? And same with the government. We have right now also conflicting situations, right? On one hand, we have free or highly subsidized electricity for irrigation, and that's a weak incentive for water conservation, for example. Vivek was mentioning about fertilizer subsidies that favors chemical inputs, and that is actually contributing to also slow adoption of bioresources or balanced nutrient management that we are talking about. So this is why I think a platform can already start, and a place-based mechanism is most efficient, because we spoke about how we have universal schemes or universal programs, but the localization becomes at the core of it. And localization can only be done by the government and industry coming together with community people at the interface, because these are the guys who are there to stay. Somebody was also putting in the comments of how I think all of us have a certain timeline of projects. We increasingly have 3 to 5 year projects, and we cannot change natural resource management in 3 to 5 years. This is clear. So, for a long term approach, where most of us have the role of being that innovator and being that external force to push things, the idea is to have that multi stakeholder platform institutionalized, because government will stay, industry will stay, and people will stay. So, I think that is the clear pathway that we have. Should government be a co-designer? Absolutely yes, because ultimately we want to see long-term changes in the policy perspective. With Sanjay and Olam, we have, a very innovative project that is going on carbon offsetting in the rice sector. And here is where Olam comes, UN Women comes to look at the gender perspective, the International Rice Research Institute comes to look at the research new model perspective. We have Ministry of Agriculture coming in, because they also now have a huge role to play in the whole CCTS and carbon credit system. And we again try to play this ecosystem player among all of it. Now everybody comes here because they all think there is a case to make. Yeah, that's an innovation to make. And whatever comes out of this in terms of successful models that we have built, let's say over the last 4 years, then slowly and steadily goes into the policy perspective for a long-term transformative approach that we can see. I think so that's let's say the clear way forward, the willingness, and that is where we need that shared interest. We need to meet the demands of each stakeholder. That is at the heart of it. And looking forward, because I think all of us have this shared goal to achieve.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks, Mika. I think inclusivity is also what Anuj was saying earlier, and bringing all the actors in that supply shed and looking at their interest, how their interests are served through that coalition. I think that's the key, and government is definitely going to be a key player in that. So I'll move to Anuji. Anuji, the question for you is because you are a philanthropy. What role do you see philanthropic capital playing in this kind of a coalition? What does philanthropy funds, which other actors will find it difficult to fund? Philanthropy is mostly seen as the catalytic capital, doing something which others will not actually do. So that's something that I would like to know from you.
Thank you, Shailesh, again for this question. But I guess, so the simple answer, if I were to just say, okay, these are the top headlines, right? Every player, even if they are a smallholder farmers, but let's say there are cane farmers and there are non-cane farmers, right? And there are government, there are mills, every player has incentives committed. If we can imagine a non-incentivized player, most likely it has to be a philanthropy, which has nothing to do with business side of this interaction, right? Where the commons by themselves are important, inclusivity is by itself important, and then obviously the economic prosperity is important, right? The other piece would be the participation architecture, both for inclusivity and otherwise for the long stay. Normally, when we talk about sustainability, unfortunately, we end up talking only about the resource sustainability, right? But there is an institutional sustainability element also, right? So you have to design it from that perspective. And the last one, I would say, just the designing the governance. Like I was saying, there is always a counter group. And if the counter group is the weaker group, The philanthropy or whoever is taking the responsibility of holding it together has to make sure saying the demands are vocalized and they get enough space and representation there, right? So these are the top three ones. But if you ask me, the nitty-gritties of it, when you start doing a multi-stake sort of coalition, I would say as a philanthropy, don't look at an instance, look at a platform, which can be beyond commodity, beyond geography, to say, okay, we are going to standardize the data set and the methodology and the specification to the standard that can be made available across, right? So again, think of it from the long term. If it can be done in 3 years, someone else is going to do it. Philanthropy should not do it, right? So that's another, I would say, one way of looking at it. The other part is this whole, see, one should be very, very aware that money that philanthropies have compared to both private sector and the government, that money is rounding error. It's not even a rounding error. So you have to also use it very wisely to say where you can make the difference. There are a couple of points in the direction of saying, because Mika, I think, mentioned the carbon credit space, right? So to give everyone an example, AWD, the alternative wetting and drying, has been sort of known idea for, I would say, 10, 15, 20 years at least, right? But we were doing some work in Yadgir district and we realized saying that's just not a practice with the farmers, right? And just investing some bits and bulk flow meters and just the measurement side of it. And this is where I'm coming to the role, right? We could get first in 5 villages, 120 farmers to see the benefit. Today, I'm happy to share saying, we had not even planned for it. We were doing it only for the water savings, right? But suddenly you realize the AWD leads to the methane reduction and hence there is a carbon credit play. Suddenly 30,000 acres have been signed in that area under AWD, right? And that's the power of, we can afford to fail. Philanthropies can afford to fail, which neither the private sector is willing to risk, nor the government wants to. I mean, there is a political capital invested all the time when you're trying to create a new initiative, right? The last thing, which I believe has been spoken, but more from the fertilizer standpoint, but let's say in the sugarcane space, right? The one guarantee that you need in the designing is that our waste will not be polluting further, right? That's a very critical piece of action and sort of agreement among the stakeholders if this kind of a multi-stakeholder thing has to come into play, right? So with that, I think I'll just say that don't invest in just the artifact, right? I mean, think of a transfer vehicle. And your role is to, I mean, philanthropy's role is to build an instrumentation panel, so to speak, right? There are drivers who will drive, right? But you're just making sure saying it's in balance frame. Yeah. Back to you.
Got it. Thanks. I think what you're talking about is also a public good which comes out of this. You're also talking about using this capital carefully because of the nature of it and the quantum of it. And thirdly, I think what you are talking about is the holding those principles, the panel that you are saying. So I think that is going to be the role, and I think that's critical because when we are looking at designing of this platform, someone has to hold it together while commercial interest at different layers, farmers level, corporate level, all that is there. But ultimately, it's also sustainability of the institutions themselves and also how those institutions are functioning for social, economic, and ecological outcomes are going to be important. Right. So yeah, thanks, everyone. So before, we still have some time for question and answers, but before we go into question and answer, just a quick poll. We wanted this poll primarily because we received a lot of interest from Africa. So just put that poll, and I think it will just take a couple of minutes, and then we can go to audience questions. Yes. No, sorry, the third one, Divyansh. Just a couple of minutes. Probably 30 seconds more and we'll close this. Yeah, I think we can close this now. Okay, so we have responses. So there is some interest within Africa for such a session. Good to know that. I think we'll take that into cognizance. We'll see that if such a session can be organized in Africa. So now let me go to the questions. We have a few questions. There are very complicated nuances to water resource management, regulation, conservation, and the nexus with agri-economics of each region. Would it be possible to form regional coalitions to tackle these issues with a country as divergent as India? One size fit all approach will not work, as evident from impacts of all the large scale schemes being implemented right now. So I think, Mika, if you can answer this question, because this is related to governance and it's about, maybe I think the question is asking that maybe larger regional coalitions is possible to tackle such issues.
I think we should try everything, and each of it will have its own merit. So if we look at issues of soil, land, water, and if we put natural resource to the heart of it, then maybe the best suited approach is to look at a river basin management approach or a watershed level. I mean, how big is the landscape? So currently, if we look at the definition of landscape, we, for example, in Chhatarpur in Madhya Pradesh, is looking at a landscape of 35,000 hectares. So I think we should look at several aspects. One is the natural resource boundary and how do we deal with that. Another one is the governance boundary and how do we deal with that. So in India, I would say that, at a regional level, we do not have a governance mechanism. We go very administratively from a panchayat to a block to a district to a state to a national. So if we have to align governance, financing to natural resource management, then from that perspective, maybe a district boundary is better, and a landscape at a level of a river basin, where we look at still a cluster of districts, this might be more effective. Of course, I think when it again come to an agroclimatic zone perspective, then we could take more of a regional approach, because then we have, let's say, northeastern states have a very specific kind of problem, or a coastal area would have very specific kind of problems. So these are mix and matches that we need to do. What are we trying to address? That needs to be more clear, because if it is a policy narrative, then maybe even we need this whole approach to go in a cascading manner and ultimately reach like a national level policy to intervene. So as long as we are clear as to what we need to tackle, accordingly we can have approaches. but maybe regional is not the right space to start from. I think this is at least would be my perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mika. I think, yes, to me also, it seems that, the region becoming larger without any unit level or smaller coalitions performing there, I think it's difficult. So we are basically talking about going to basin level. And I think there are some initiatives currently within India working, which are starting from smaller sub basins or district level geographies, and then moving up, building from there. And what we are also thinking in that is that how private sector, which is integral part in these sub basins, what role they can play, and these are agri based and even other industries as well. So yeah, the I think the second question, unless someone else wants to answer this particular question from the panel. Otherwise, the next question is for Vivek. Vivek, one question is that how GIS-based information system can support towards water conservation approaches. In India, government is implementing VBG Ramji, where they are integrating with Yuktadhara. So I think the key question here is that how GIS can help in building that intelligence framework that you are speaking about.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of responded to it in the second
Okay.
response that I had. No, no, but I wanted to add something. So I mentioned the possible benefits, and I think all of us know possible benefits of how GIS can possibly be used. But I've checked out Yuktadhara. Finally, after 5-6 years, there's a version out that is actively being used. That is great. It's actually quite good. The site suitability stuff that Yuktadhara gives for GRMG is decent. The problem is that we see it as a silver bullet again, with like so many other things. It has to be contextualized on the ground. So GIS will only take you thus far. It has to first end in insights rather than just maps or data, right? That is the secondary part where it kind of misses somewhat. Once you have some tentative insights or hypothesis, it has to club to the field data. That is when GIS becomes super helpful. It needs a feedback mechanism from the ground in a contextualized way to actually make it much more helpful, if that makes sense. But of course, that's helpful, and with the increase in data availability, like Meka was mentioning, and the AI capabilities, I'm sure in the next 10 years things are going to change drastically. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. I think the next question is for Sanjay ji. Ji, you highlighted that farm and factory are joined at hip, and Mika also noted that the real challenge is coordination. It's not funding. So the question is that how can corporate anchors work with local governments to build joint district level platforms that align corporate procurement with the public water and soil funds?
So I can give you the example of, this PPP AID scheme in Maharashtra, or the PPP VCD scheme, I think the value chain development schemes which are there, which is where funding is available. Obviously, you have to converge the farmer, the government, and the private players' interest there. But there are mechanisms which are available. I've seen, I'm aware that Unilever, exploited or leveraged this scheme very well for their, tomato procurement network in Nasik. They had done that. Similarly, we had also tried to do it. Of course, there are some, we have some expectations from the government as to how they make it more practical and less onerous for the private players. So we need to work with the government, but the government has shown a very strong keenness there. They have created these schemes. Funding is also available there. But yes, we need to make it a little bit more friendly for the private players.
Thanks, Sanjay ji. Next question is I think this is for Vivek. I'm leaving the first part of it, which I don't understand, but it is primarily that current intelligence frameworks are basically about threat mapping approach for soil and water systems, which account not only for traditional physical risk, but also the emerging digital threats. I'm not sure that, whether these are actually there in India, but sensor spoofing, AI generated false alerts, induced shutdowns. The question is that if the first step towards any credible security strategy is knowing your infrastructure or resources and their attached vulnerability, how should countries redesign their vulnerability mapping frameworks to integrate these physical, digital, data, and governance layers in the intelligence framework? So I think it is
Yeah.
probably related to, not only the natural resources, but also the physical infrastructure, which is there probably to uh, leverage this particular natural resources, if
No,
I
of course,
understand
there
it
are there are
correctly.
larger critical infrastructure like dams, which are also electronic nowadays, I guess, and they might be vulnerable. I have no idea. But yeah, generally speaking, yeah, it's not quite relevant for the Indian case. But of course, one has to be vigilant about these things. The biggest security risk that we have faced is that our sensors keep getting stolen on the field. That's the closest thing to reality. But yeah, yeah, that happens.
Yeah, I think the question might also be may not be pointing, but to me it also seems that there's a lot of investment which goes into building these kind of public infrastructure, and these are natural infrastructure. Now, the risk which is embedded in it, can this intelligence framework inform the design? For example, if I'm building a very large pond or let's say a big check dam, although there is a data behind it, but an intelligence framework which is working at a sub basin level or at a supply shed level, how this can inform? Because few months ago we were in an area where heavy rains actually washed out 60 crores worth of investment, which was in water and soil infrastructure. So is there a possibility of averting that kind of losses?
Yeah, no, I mean, these data, if they're going into important decisions, they have to have a sort of, a measure of error, or, what is the probability or that you will be right. And even, some sort of field validation mechanism. That's all I can say.
Okay, I think these are the questions we can take. I think the of course means any discussion on coalition or a multi-actor platform is complicated, and we have diverse panelists also on this. And as we move along, our experience also suggests that we have to take cognizance of the different views which are coming from different actors working or having interest in that particular area. But I think the what we can take back from the discussion today is that yes, it is possible and required for to work towards building a kind of multi-actor platform, especially looking at a supply shed area and the layers which I talked about in the beginning. And I think every actor has a role, has a position on that. How do we, I would say, leverage the positions to craft or stitch together that kind of a coalition which is inclusive, which has the principle built into it, which is also working on the kind of intelligence framework which is built uh, for the coalition, and which this intelligence framework is not only for informing the kind of action, but also to get more actors on board, because that is going to provide the information that what kind of investment that they can take, what kind of benefits different actors can have, and ultimately how each one can benefit, each actor can benefit from that. So I think bringing together that kind of a multi-actor platform, though it is a challenge, but I think there is a need for it, especially from the supply shed perspective as well. And I think there is a lot that can be extracted, more value can be extracted from that. And the layer one, which we started with, which is the natural resource layers, soil and water, which are getting degraded, I think all this action is also towards how we sustainably manage that and extract value out of it for the layer two, which is farmers, their yield, their income. And that's the final, I would say, the goal or shared vision that this multi-actor platform can have. So thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining, and really appreciate the panelists' views. And thank you again.
Thank you. Quite
Thank
enlightening.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shailesh. Everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
A lot.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.